Meadrow Unitarian Chapel. Meadrow Unitarian Chapel, also known as Meadrow Chapel, and Godalming Unitarian Church, is a Unitarian chapel in the Farncombe area of Godalming. It is part of the London District and South-Eastern Provincial Assembly of Unitarian and Free Christian Churches, one of 16 districts within the General Assembly of Unitarian and Free Christian Churches, the umbrella organization for British Unitarians. Founded in 1789 as a General Baptist chapel in a town where Protestant Nonconformism was historically strong, it can trace its roots back to informal 17th-century Baptist meetings in houses and other venues. The congregation's doctrines changed during the 19th century to encompass Unitarian ideas, and the church has long been regarded as Unitarian. Worship took place in another building within the grounds for more than a century, until the mid-1970s, when the old chapel, which has been listed at grade Roman II for its architectural and historical importance, was returned to religious use. History, context, and beliefs. The ancient settlement of Godalming is a rarity among towns of southern England. It developed as a small-scale industrial centre rather than as a market town. In terms of religion, industrial workers in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries often tended towards nonconformism rather than Anglican or Roman Catholic worship, and this was the case in Godalming during the reign of King Charles Roman II in the late 17th century. Well over 1,000 of the 3,000 residents were nonconformists. One of the largest nonconformist groups, and the longest established and most prominent in the west of Surrey, were Baptists. By the 18th century, Calvinistic strict and particular Baptists had split to form a separate denomination, and most Baptists identified with the general Baptist tradition, which differed little in its theology from Anglicanism, the established church. However, some of these congregations later experienced a further development in their doctrinal position towards anti-Trinitarianism, the rejection of the doctrine of the Trinity, and developed into Unitarian churches. This doctrinal shift happened at Godalming, where General Baptist meetings have a long history. Small groups identifying as Baptist, but with no organized structure, met in various places in the Godalming area from the 17th century, helped by regular visits from prominent preacher Matthew Caffin of Horsham in Sussex. By the second half of the 18th century, meetings regularly took place at the house of William Evershed, who lived between Godalming and Eashing. Evershed merely leased this cottage. He owned land and a house in Billingshurst near Horsham, and in 1754 he founded a General Baptist chapel there, which soon became Unitarian. It continues in use as Billingshurst Unitarian Chapel, and descendants of the Evershed family still worship there. Building the chapel. In the late 18th century, the congregation who met at Evershed's house decided to build a permanent chapel in Godalming. Records show that on June 4, 1783, at a church meeting held at Bro. W.M. Evershed's at Eashing, Godalming, it was agreed that a more convenient place of public worship may conduce much to the ease and prosperity of this chapel. The simple, attractive building had a baptistery to allow total immersion baptism in accordance with General Baptist principles. The first such baptism was recorded in 1809. The church gradually moved towards Unitarianism and became fully associated with that denomination in the second half of the 19th century. Another small group, which met at a house in Crumpets elsewhere in Godalming, later joined the congregation. The group called itself the Particular Unitarian Baptist Church and traced its roots back many years. In 1821, a brick cottage was built on to the north side of the chapel. In 1870, a Gothic Revival-style Sunday school building was constructed much closer to the road. It was later converted into a chapel, and the 1789 building became the Sunday school. This situation was reversed in 1975 or 1976, when the 1870 building reverted to its original role as a schoolroom, and meeting room and worship again took place in the old chapel. As well as the Sunday school, the church, like many others during the Victorian era, when a keen sense of social justice characterized nonconformist churches, in particular helped to found a free non-denominational day school in accordance with Joseph Lancaster's educational model. A site was found on Bridge Road near the town centre, and a fine new British school was built. Now grade Roman II listed, it was constructed in 1872 and extended in about 1900. After the church moved back from the 1870 building into the original chapel, it was registered for the solemnization of marriages in June 1976. It is also licensed for worship in accordance with the Places of Worship Registration Act 1855 and has the registration number 74,000. Architecture. The chapel was designated a grade Roman II listed building on 16 May 1975. Such buildings are defined as nationally important and of special interest. As of February 2001, it was one of 1548 grade Roman II listed buildings and 1661 listed buildings of all grades in the borough of Waverley, the local government district in which Godalming is situated. It is one of several current and former places of worship in Godalming with listed status: St. Edmund's Roman Catholic Church, the Quaker Meeting House on Mill Street, the former Salvation Army Hall on Mint Street, originally Congregational, and later Methodist, and the later Congregational Church on Bridge Street, also no longer in religious use, are all grade Roman II. The chapel is a single-story building of red-brown brick laid in the English bond pattern. The brickwork is still visible on the attached cottage, but the chapel has been rendered with stucco. The cottage has 2 stories but is the same height as the chapel. They share a roof, which is laid with tiles. The facade consists of 4 bays, of which the leftmost is formed by the cottage. A gabled porch is placed centrally, and there is a chimney stack halfway along the roof and another on the end of the cottage. The divide between the cottage and the chapel is marked by quoins, and a cornice runs across the facade below the roof line. The chapel has 3 arched windows. The 2 to the right of the entrance porch are full height, but the other between the cottage and the porch lights only the upper section of the chapel. There is a door below it which may have replaced the lower section. Another door gives entry to the cottage. It is set below a straight-headed porch with a wooden architrave. The chapel's porch has a round arched entrance and a cross on the gable. There are 3 round arched windows to the rear of the chapel, which is faced with slates and which backs on to the riverway. Inside, the original pews and benches have been moved to the walls to give an open worship space which takes up the rightmost 2 bays of the chapel. Separated from this above the 3rd bay is a panelled gallery supported by columns and a cross beam. A good row of het pegs was noted in a survey of 1986. The chapel, inclusive of all 3 bays, measures 35.5 by 22 feet 10.8 m x 6.7 m. The baptistery set into the floor survives. There are brick steps down into it, and it is lined with bricks. Burial ground. The last burial at the chapel took place in 1869. 10 years later, the first transcript was taken of the inscriptions on the monuments and gravestones. There are 4 burial vaults in front of the chapel. From north to south they are: Henry Portsmouth Elfs died 1833, and Betty Elfs died 1834. Thomas Pilsley died 1810, the first burial in the burial ground, and Pilsley died 1816. John Ellies died 1824. Mary Ellies died 1825, and Sarah Ellies died 1815. John Ellies was a major contributor to the chapel's construction. George Knight died 1843, and Emily Knight died 1848. Including these vaults, 46 people are interred in the burial ground. There are 3 rows of 8, 2 and 9 graves on the north side of the path to the chapel entrance, 4 under the path commemorated by stones set into it, and 2 rows of 5 and 4 to the south of the path. There are 4 burials behind the 1870 building, by the northern boundary of the burial ground, and 6 alongside the southern boundary. The surname Ellies appears 12 times, and in the first row of 8 graves 7 are named Cook.